A few weeks ago, I received an unusually bulky envelope from my homeowners association, HOA. Typically, their mail consists of newsletters filled with passive-aggressive reminders to trim the lawn and occasional dues invoices. However, this time was different. Instead of a newsletter, it was a compilation of new regulations, fastened together as if they were formal proclamations from royalty. The first thing that struck me was the level of detail. There was a section stating that vehicles couldn't remain in driveways overnight, only in garages. Another rule required lawns to maintain at least 90% uniform grass coverage, eliminating any visible weeds or non-native plants. Then came a particularly alarming clause: quarterly interior inspections to ensure properties meet community standards. I had to read that last line twice, unsure if I had misunderstood. Interior inspections of my own home? I'd like to think I was overreacting, but I immediately messaged my neighbor Brian to see if he had noticed it too. Brian not only noticed it, but he was also furious. "They're not coming into my house," he texted back. "What are they even thinking? I've lived in this neighborhood for about 5 years. It's a peaceful, middle-class suburb, mainly consisting of families and retirees. It's a pleasant place, neither overly luxurious nor rundown, just clean and comfortable. The HOA can be a hassle at times, mostly with parking regulations and landscaping fines, nothing major. But this was different. It felt excessive and unsettling. The next day, I decided to send a polite email to the HOA board, hoping they might clarify or possibly retract the new rules if enough residents objected. The response I received was anything but comforting. "Thank you for your inquiry," wrote Laura, the HOA president. "These regulations are updates to our community standards, approved by the board to ensure consistency and uphold property values. Compliance is mandatory." Now here's where things took a strange turn. I asked when the vote occurred, as I had not received any notification as a homeowner. Laura dismissed my question, mentioning something vague about the board having the authority to make executive decisions, which isn't accurate. HOAs have specific legal guidelines they must follow. They can't just impose outrageous regulations without notice and consider it settled. Nevertheless, I wasn't ready to escalate things legally yet. I assumed it might be a misunderstanding and wanted to discuss it with other neighbors to see if they were aware. It turned out that no one had. Maria, the retired nurse living across the street, told me she hadn't even opened the envelope. Brian mentioned he tried emailing Laura as well and received a similarly dismissive reply. Emma, a single mother living 2 houses down, expressed that the rules made her extremely uncomfortable, but she didn't want to cause trouble since she had previously been fined for her children's bikes being visible from the street. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream. Now back to the story. At this stage, I started to question what was happening. Later that week, I noticed new green flags appearing on some lawns. Not every house, just a few scattered ones. I didn't think much of it until I heard Luis, one of the HOA board members, speaking with Daniel, another neighbor. Luis explained that the flags indicated non-compliant lawns. What? My own lawn had no flag, but Brian's did. I texted him, and he confirmed that no one from the HOA had approached him about it. They just placed the flag. That evening, I decided to review the HOA's official bylaws. I'm no attorney, but I can read legal documents, and what I discovered was significant. The new rules didn't apply to me. When I purchased my home, it was among the last built in the area, and the previous owner had secured a grandfathered exemption from any future HOA changes. It was buried deep in the paperwork, clearly stated. Essentially, unless I chose to adopt the new rules voluntarily, the HOA couldn't enforce anything beyond the original covenants established when the HOA was formed. In other words, I was exempt. Not someone who seeks conflict. I also don't tolerate bullies. And something about Laura's dismissal of my concerns and the imposition of new rules without a vote felt personal. It seemed less about maintaining property values and more about asserting control. So, I decided to conduct a small experiment the next day. I parked my large, old truck in my driveway, definitely not HOA approved even on a good day. Additionally, I visited a plant nursery and purchased several native plants, wildflowers, a shrub, and a small cactus, planting them in my front yard. They looked great, but more importantly, they directly violated the new rules. Unsurprisingly, the HOA took notice quickly. 2 days later, I received a letter, a formal violation notice from Laura herself. "Your property has been flagged for non-compliance," it read. "Failure to address these issues will result in a fine of $150 per day, retroactive to the date of this notice." Retroactive fines for planting flowers. At this point, I couldn't help but chuckle. I sat at my computer and composed an email. "Laura, I received your notice regarding my property and would like to remind you of a clause in my purchase agreement that exempts my property from any HOA rules. Therefore, the violations you've cited are not enforceable and I will not be paying any fines. If you'd like to discuss this further, I'm prepared to involve my attorney. Otherwise, I consider this matter closed. Regards, Mark." I sent it and leaned back, feeling strangely content. But I wasn't finished. Something about Laura and the new regulations still bothered me, and I was determined to uncover the truth. The next morning, I saw something alarming. Strangers walking through the neighborhood with clipboards, inspecting people's yards. They stopped at Brian's place, took notes, and moved on to Emma's house without knocking or announcing themselves. They were conducting property inspections. For the first time since this began, I felt truly uneasy. Who were these individuals? On a Thursday morning, as usual, I moved my trash bins to the curb. Nothing out of the ordinary, but by day's end, unlike others whose bins were emptied and returned, mine remained full. I contacted the waste management company, assuming it was an oversight. After 20 minutes on hold, I finally spoke to a representative who nonchalantly said, "Oh, your account was canceled at the request of your HOA." What? I asked for clarification, and the representative explained that the HOA had removed me from the community's bulk trash service list. They couldn't provide a reason, just that it was an HOA decision. I was somewhere between laughing and throwing my phone across the room. This was intentional. I called Laura that same day. She didn't answer, as expected, but when I emailed her, she responded with insincere politeness. "Dear Mark, thank you for bringing this to my attention. The HOA reserves the right to modify service agreements for non-compliant properties. Please ensure your property adheres to community standards moving forward to avoid service interruptions. Regards, Laura." Translation: follow our rules or face consequences. Following the trash issue, things intensified. First, I received a noise complaint, allegedly blasting music at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The irony, I wasn't even home. I was at work. The next day, another complaint arrived, claiming my wildflowers were spreading invasive species. Then another said my truck was obstructing community views. And another accused me of having hazardous debris in my yard. A single bag of mulch I hadn't yet used. It was clear what they were doing. They weren't just enforcing arbitrary rules. They were piling on complaints and fines to force me to comply or leave. I decided to document everything. Every letter, email, and interaction. I organized them into a folder and began taking photos of my yard and driveway every morning and evening to counter any false accusations. Brian was experiencing similar harassment. He informed me he was fined for having his recycling bin out too early, and Emma had it even worse. She called me one afternoon in tears because someone from the HOA left a note saying her child's basketball hoop was detrimental to property values. She attempted to resist, but Laura dismissed her, stating it was for the community's benefit. This wasn't just about me anymore. Laura and her team were targeting anyone who didn't conform. Remember those clipboard-wielding strangers? I finally discovered who they were. A week after the trash incident, one Saturday morning, I saw them again on my street. This time, I chose to confront them. "Hey," I called out, stepping onto my porch as they approached. "Can I help you?" The two men, both middle-aged and dressed in matching polo shirts, exchanged a glance before one replied, "We're conducting routine compliance inspections for the HOA." "Routine, huh?" I questioned. "Do you usually do these without notifying homeowners?" They didn't respond. Instead, one of them scribbled on his clipboard while the other took a photo of my yard. Anger flared within me, but I maintained a calm tone. I didn't consent to any inspection. You're trespassing. HOA regulations allow for visual inspections of properties, one of them recited, clearly using a script. We are authorized to document any violations. And what violations would those be? I asked, arms crossed. They didn't answer, simply turning and leaving. I watched them go, my mind racing. Who were these people? What gave them the authority to act like this? They weren't HOA board members or homeowners. That night, I reviewed the HOA bylaws again to confirm that nothing mentioned routine compliance inspections or hiring external contractors to police the neighborhood. This was entirely fabricated. As I delved deeper, I discovered something intriguing. Laura wasn't just the HOA president. She also operated a small consulting firm on the side, a business that included community management services. Those inspectors worked for her. This wasn't about maintaining property values or enforcing regulations. It was a scam. Laura was exploiting her position to divert HOA funds into her own business while harassing homeowners who didn't comply. I shared my discoveries with Brian and a few other neighbors who were equally outraged. Brian even unearthed some old meeting minutes and found another issue. Laura's landscaping company, owned by her brother, was billing the HOA nearly double the market rate for services. We were starting to see the larger scheme, but more evidence was needed. At this point, I decided to switch from defense to offense. I filed a formal complaint with the state HOA regulatory agency, including all the bogus fines, fake inspections, and financial conflicts of interest. Then, I contacted a lawyer friend who specializes in HOA disputes, but the real action began when I shared my findings with the neighborhood. Brian and I went door to door with copies of Laura's business filings and the inflated landscaping invoices. Most residents were shocked, some angry, and a few, especially those who had been targeted by Laura's pettiness, were ready to confront the HOA board. The HOA meeting was still days away, but Laura must have sensed the shift in support, as she sent me an email late one night. Mark, it has come to my attention that you have been spreading false and defamatory information about the HOA and its board members. Please be advised that further actions of this nature may result in legal consequences. Regards, Laura. Defamation. Cute. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded her email to my lawyer, who assured me that I was within my rights to share factual information with other homeowners. But the next day, I received a knock at my door. It was one of Laura's inspectors holding a new violation notice. This time, it wasn't about my truck or wildflowers. It claimed I had an unapproved structure on my property. What structure? I asked. They pointed to my mailbox. My mailbox, final update, starting with the unapproved structure claim about my mailbox, I initially thought it was a joke. My mailbox was unchanged. Standard height, black metal mounted on a wooden post, nothing extravagant. So I emailed Laura again, asking her to specify what made it unapproved. Her reply was vague at best. The mailbox does not conform to updated HOA guidelines. Please refer to Section 7.4 of the new Community Standards for specifications. Guess what? Section 7.4 didn't even exist. By now, I wasn't angry anymore, just amused. They were grasping at straws, and the excuses were getting more flimsy each day. Still, I didn't let it go. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, who gladly added it to the growing evidence against the HOA. Meanwhile, Brian and I continued sharing our findings with the neighborhood. When the next HOA meeting arrived, nearly every homeowner was aware of Laura's unethical behavior. Typically, HOA meetings were quiet gatherings with about 10 to 15 attendees, hearing Laura discuss landscaping budgets and holiday decorations. This time, the room was packed. Maria was there, arms crossed and clearly ready to confront Laura. Emma sat near the back, looking nervous but determined. Even Daniel, who always seemed like one of Laura's supporters, was present with an annoyed expression. Laura began the meeting with her usual forced smile, pretending everything was fine. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone to keep this meeting respectful and productive, she announced in her condescending tone. The initial agenda items were the usual HOA topics, approving the budget, discussing plans for the community pool. However, During the open forum section, things took a turn. Brian was the first to speak. He stood up and, in his calm, straightforward manner, asked, "Laura, can you explain why the HOA has been paying $10,000 a month to your brother's landscaping company when the contract we signed last year was for $6,000? Laura stumbled for a moment, mentioning unexpected expenses and additional services, but Brian wasn't finished. He held up copies of invoices and public records receipts, highlighting that the extra charges were for weekly consultations and administrative fees, none of which had been approved by the board. "That's not all," he continued, turning to the crowd. "Laura has also been using HOA funds to hire her own consulting company to inspect properties. Those clipboard guys, they don't work for us. They work for her." At that point, the room erupted. People began shouting over each other, demanding answers and calling for Laura to resign. Maria stood up and added, "And what about all the new rules? You never put them to a vote. You just made them up and tried to force them on us." Laura attempted to regain control, banging her gavel as if presiding over a courtroom. "This is inappropriate. We're here to discuss community business, not personal attacks." But the homeowners weren't having it. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it straightforward. I approached the front with a folder of documents and said, "Laura, you sent me a violation notice from my mailbox. Can you explain why Section 7.4, the rule you cited, doesn't exist in the HOA bylaws?" Laura's face turned bright red. She muttered something about administrative updates and clerical errors. I continued, "And while we're addressing this, I'd like to know why it's acceptable to cancel my trash service and file baseless complaints against me for things like wildflowers and driveway parking. Is this how you maintain property values, or is it just how you handle homeowners who won't conform?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was already supporting me, and by the time I concluded, Laura looked like she wanted to vanish. But things worsened for her when Brian presented the best evidence: a cease and desist letter he had sent her earlier that week, threatening legal action unless she provided a full financial accounting of HOA funds. Laura tried to deflect, claiming she was being unfairly targeted. However, Daniel, the person I thought was her ally, stood up and declared, "Laura, enough. You've been deceiving us for years. If you don't resign now, I'll second Brian's motion for a formal vote of no confidence." Everything happened so quickly after that. Laura resigned immediately, though not before accusing the rest of us of undermining her leadership. Her small group of supporters tried to defend her, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted to suspend all new rules pending a full community vote. They also agreed to hire an independent auditor to review the HOA's finances. As for Laura, she packed her belongings and left without another word. Over the ensuing weeks, things gradually returned to normal. The green flags vanished from people's lawns, trash services were reinstated, and my wildflowers? They continued to flourish exuberantly. The audit uncovered even more dubious financial dealings, providing sufficient grounds to file a lawsuit against Laura and her brother. I'm unsure how it will proceed, but I'm just relieved she's no longer in charge. As for me, this entire experience has taught me valuable lessons. Never underestimate how far a petty HOA president will go to retain power, and always thoroughly review the fine print when purchasing a home. You never know when a small clause about grandfathered exemptions might preserve your peace of mind. I never imagined I'd encounter a real-life Karen, but life has its own plans. I'm Sam, the proprietor of a sprawling 50-acre homestead just outside the city limits. This estate has been in my lineage for countless generations, inherited from my great-great-grandfather who established it in the early 1900s. The grounds encompass the main residence, a separate guest cottage, stables, and vast stretches of untouched woodland and meadows. It's my personal paradise, a sanctuary away from the relentless pace of urban existence. Around 5 years ago, a new residential area emerged on land bordering mine. They named it Maplewood Heights. Identical large homes crowded together, each with immaculate lawns and a stringent homeowners association ensuring everything adhered to their strict standards. At first, I paid little heed to it. I believed in a live and let live approach, assuming that as long as they respected the property boundaries, we would coexist peacefully. How wrong I was. It all began on a chilly autumn dawn. I was taking my customary stroll around the estate, inspecting fences and savoring the vibrant fall hues, when a piercing voice rang out from behind me. Excuse me, sir." I turned to see a woman in her late 40s briskly walking towards me, her short brunette hair bouncing with each purposeful step. She was clad in leggings and a zip-up jacket, holding a tablet tightly against her chest as if it were a sacred text. "Can I assist you?" I inquired, attempting to mask my irritation. I don't welcome unexpected guests on my land. She finally reached me, slightly winded. "Yes, hello, I'm Linda Brown, president of the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association." She extended her hand, which I shook reluctantly. "Sam Thompson," I responded simply. "Mr. Thompson, I'm glad I found you. We need to address some significant breaches of our community regulations." I blinked, perplexed. "I'm sorry, what?" Linda swiftly navigated her tablet, displaying some form of checklist. "Firstly, your lawn is severely overgrown. Our bylaws explicitly state that grass must be kept below 3 inches, and your trees are far from compliant. We have stringent rules regarding trimming and maintenance. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. This lets me know to continue with making these videos. Let's continue." I raised a hand to interrupt. "Madam, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not affiliated with your homeowners association." She looked at me as if I had declared the moon was made of cheese. "Don't be absurd. Naturally, you are a member. All residents of Maplewood Heights must belong to the homeowners association." "That may be true," I replied slowly, striving to maintain my composure. "But I don't reside in Maplewood Heights. This is my private property, held by my family for nearly a century." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Now listen here, Mr. Thompson. I don't take kindly to being deceived. I can see your house clearly from here, and it's undoubtedly within our community limits." I took a deep breath. "Madam Linda, I assure you it's not. My land predates your development by many years. If you would kindly depart, I'll consider this misunderstanding resolved." But Linda was determined. She planted her feet, crossing her arms, the tablet acting as her shield. "I won't leave until we rectify these violations, especially those trees." "There are no violations," I stated firmly. "This is private property. Your homeowners association holds no jurisdiction here." "We'll see about that," Linda huffed, pulling out her phone and beginning to type furiously. "I'm calling the authorities. They'll handle this." I almost chuckled. "Go ahead. I have nothing to conceal." Thus began my bizarre afternoon dealing with Maplewood Heights' most demanding resident. Little did I realize, this was merely the start of my struggles with Linda Brown. While awaiting the police, Linda paced back and forth, mumbling to herself and occasionally casting hostile glances my way. I leaned against a nearby pine tree, finding amusement despite my frustration. After roughly 20 minutes, a patrol car arrived down the long driveway. Officer Mike Daniels stepped out, a puzzled expression upon seeing me. "Afternoon, Sam," he greeted as he approached. "What's the issue?" Before I could respond, Linda approached him briskly. "Officer, I'd like to report multiple infractions of our homeowners association bylaws. This gentleman is refusing to adhere to our community standards and claims he's not even a member." Mike raised an eyebrow at me. I shrugged. "Madam, I'm not part of your association." Mike addressed Linda calmly. "Madam Brown, I'm aware of Mr. Thompson and his property. He's correct. This land isn't part of Maplewood Heights. It's a private estate established long before your development." Linda's expression shifted from self-satisfied to shocked, then to furious within seconds. "That's impossible. I can see his house from my backyard." "You can see the boundary of my property from your backyard," I corrected. "But there's over a quarter-mile of my land separating your fence line from my house." Mike nodded in agreement. "He's right, madam. There are no homeowners association violations here since Mr. Thompson isn't subject to your association's rules. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" Linda sputtered incoherently before regaining her composure. "Even if he's not officially part of our community, There must be local ordinances regarding property upkeep. You can't just let your land become untidy. It affects our property values. I bit my tongue to suppress a laugh. My well-maintained estate, valued significantly higher than your standardized houses, somehow lowers your property values? That's quite a stretch. Mike maintained his professionalism. Madam Brown, Mr. Thompson's property complies with county codes. There are no violations. I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. You're trespassing on private property. Linda's face turned a vivid shade of red. This isn't over, she hissed before storming off towards her vehicle. Once she was out of earshot, Mike approached me with a grin. Sorry about that, Sam. New members sometimes overstep their boundaries. I chuckled. No problem, Mike. Thanks for stepping in. Want a beer before you head back? He shook his head. Better not while on duty, but maybe another time. Take care, Sam. As Mike drove away, I felt a sense of relief, thinking the crisis was averted. Little did I know, this was just the opening move in Linda Brown's campaign against my property. In the ensuing weeks, life was blissfully calm. I focused on managing the estate and enjoying the tranquility. However, Linda was relentless. It began subtly with passive-aggressive notes in my mailbox, reminding me of community standards and encouraging good neighborly behavior. I discarded them without a second thought. Then came the more blatant actions. I noticed Linda's SUV cruising along the road adjacent to my property, her eyes darting back and forth as if searching for more infractions to report. On one occasion, I saw her parked at the edge of my driveway, leaning out the window with her phone, seemingly capturing photos. I decided to address this immediately. I approached her on the road, maintaining a stern demeanor. Linda, I called out as I approached. Is there a problem? She startled, clearly unprepared for confrontation. Oh, Mr. Thompson, I was just admiring the view, I interjected, with your phone pointed directly at my property. Linda appeared slightly embarrassed, but quickly recovered. Well, if you must know, I was documenting ongoing issues with your land. The Homeowners Association Board is very concerned about... Linda, we've discussed this. I'm not part of your Homeowners Association. Your board has no authority here, I cut her off. I'm kindly asking you to stop harassing me and photographing my property. If this persists, I'll involve the authorities. Her eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me, Mr. Thompson? I sighed. No, Linda, I'm setting a boundary. Please respect it. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked back towards my home, hearing her engine rev as she sped away, undoubtedly furious. I hoped that would end it, but Linda was only just beginning. A few days later, while working in my workshop, I heard a commotion outside. Stepping out, I found a group of men in uniform surveying my front yard, taking measurements and making notes. Excuse me, I called as I approached. Can I help you, gentlemen? One man, seemingly in charge, looked up with the clipboard. Good afternoon, sir. We're from the county assessor's office conducting a property evaluation. I frowned. I wasn't informed of any evaluation. May I ask the reason? The man checked his clipboard. We received a complaint regarding potential code violations and unpermitted structures on this property. We're here to investigate and reassess the property value if necessary. My frustration surged. I had a hunch where the complaint originated. I understand, I said calmly. And who exactly filed this complaint? The man hesitated. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose that information. However, I assure you this is standard procedure. I took a deep breath. All right, I can assure you there are no code violations or unpermitted structures on my property. Every building here has been properly permitted and inspected. If you'd like to verify, I'd be happy to provide the documentation. The lead inspector seemed relieved. That would be very helpful, Mr. Thompson. I guided the inspectors to my office and produced a thick folder containing permits, inspection reports, and property surveys. We spent the next hour reviewing everything meticulously. By the end, the lead inspector shook his head. Mr. Thompson, I apologize for the inconvenience. Everything here is in order. Your property is exceptionally well maintained. I managed a tight smile. I appreciate that. While I understand you can't disclose who filed the complaint, can you confirm if it originated from someone in the Maplewood Heights development? The inspector hesitated before nodding slightly. I can't elaborate, but yes, there was a report from your neighboring development. I thanked the inspectors and saw them leave. As their vehicles disappeared down the driveway, I felt a mix of anger and frustration. Linda was escalating the situation, and I knew I had to put an end to it before things spiraled further. The following day, I decided to take action. I drove to the Maplewood Heights development, easily locating Linda's home thanks to the Homeowners Association President's sign prominently displayed in her front yard. Taking a deep breath to remain calm, I rang her doorbell. Linda answered, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Thompson, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Linda," I responded evenly. "I believe it's time we had a serious discussion about boundaries and respecting private property." She stiffened. "I don't know what you're referring to. If this is about the county inspectors, I was merely fulfilling my duty as a concerned citizen by reporting potential violations." I raised my hand. "Linda, let's drop the pretense. We both know you filed that complaint out of spite because I refuse to adhere to your homeowners association rules. I'm here to inform you once and for all that this needs to stop." Linda's face flushed with anger. "How dare you come to my home and accuse me? I'm not done yet," I asserted. "Your harassment and attempts to force compliance with rules that don't apply to me are bordering on illegal. If you continue, I'll be forced to take legal action. Is that what you want?" For a moment, Linda seemed uncertain, but then her eyes hardened. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thompson? The Homeowners Association has a strong legal team, and we're prepared to use it." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Linda, your Homeowners Association lawyers have no jurisdiction here. I'm not a member, remember? However, I have my own legal counsel, experienced in handling harassment and nuisance claims. So I'm asking you one final time to cease your harassment of me and my property." We stared at each other for an extended moment, neither willing to back down. Finally, Linda spoke. "We'll see about that, Mr. Thompson. This isn't over." With that, she slammed the door in my face. As I returned to my car, a sinking feeling settled in. I sensed that things were about to escalate further. In the ensuing weeks, tensions mounted. Every time I passed the entrance to Maplewood Heights, I felt Linda's scrutiny from behind her curtains. I attempted to continue my life as usual, but the persistent feeling that she was plotting something gnawed at me. My suspicions were confirmed one Saturday morning when I woke to the sounds of voices and machinery on my property. Throwing on some clothes, I rushed outside to find a landscaping crew working near my front gate. "Hey!" I shouted as I jogged towards them. "What is happening here?" The workers halted, exchanging uncertain glances. A man who appeared to be in charge stepped forward. "Good morning, sir. We're here to execute the landscaping plan as directed by the Homeowners Association." My blood boiled. "What Homeowners Association? I've told you countless times. I'm not part of your association." The foreman looked confused. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." We received explicit instructions from Mrs. Brown to bring this property up to community standards. She mentioned that the homeowner had finally agreed to comply. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 to steady myself. When I opened them, I saw Linda's SUV pulling up to my gate, a triumphant smile on her face. "Ah, Mr. Thompson," she called out as she exited her car. "I see you're pleased with the improvements. Don't worry, we'll have your place looking pristine in no time." I approached her, fists clenched. "Linda, what do you think you're doing? You have no authority to send a crew onto my property?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I'm simply helping you comply with our community standards. You should be grateful." "Grateful? For trespassing and vandalism?" I retorted. Her smile wavered slightly. "Linda, I've been more than patient with you, but enough is enough." Taking a deep breath to control my temper, I continued. "I'm going to say this one last time. I am not part of your community. This is private property. You and your crew are trespassing. If you don't leave immediately, I'll call the police." Linda's eyes narrowed. Go ahead, call them. I have documentation showing that this property is part of Maplewood Heights. She produced a folder from her oversized purse and waved it in my face. I grabbed the folder and quickly scanned its contents. My eyes widened as I realized the truth. These are forgeries, I stated, my voice low and threatening. You've manipulated property records to make it appear my land is part of your development. Linda's smug smile returned. Prove it. That was the final straw. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Yes, I need to report trespassing and attempted fraud in progress. Linda's face paled as she realized the gravity of the situation. She turned to the landscaping crew. Pack it up, boys. We'll continue another day. But I wasn't letting her go that easily. You're not going anywhere, Linda. You'll wait here until the police arrive. The next hour was a whirlwind of police cars, statements, and barely contained anger. Officer Mike Daniels returned, accompanied by a detective specializing in property crimes. They listened to both sides, examined Linda's forged documents, and took statements from the landscaping crew. In the end, Linda was taken into custody, charged with criminal trespass, attempted fraud, and filing false reports. As they placed her in the back of a patrol car, she continued to rant about community standards and property values. The detective turned to me. Mr. Thompson, I'll need you to come down to the station to file a formal complaint. This is a serious matter, and will require your full cooperation to build the case. I nodded, still in disbelief from the morning's events. Of course, whatever you need. As the police left and the landscaping crew disbanded, I surveyed the minor damage to my property. Thankfully, they hadn't caused significant disruption, but my meticulously maintained grounds bore a few visible signs of their presence. I sighed, realizing this conflict was far from over. Linda's actions had crossed a line, leaving me no choice but to seek legal protection for myself and my property. Over the following weeks, my life became a flurry of legal consultations, property assessments, and meetings with various county officials. I enlisted the services of a top-tier property rights attorney, Sandra Martinez, to handle my case and seek damages against both Linda personally and the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association. They'll likely try to distance themselves from her actions, Sandra cautioned during one of our meetings. The Homeowners Association board will claim they were unaware of what Linda was doing and that she acted independently. I nodded, unsurprised, though I believed they held some responsibility due to her role as association president. Exactly, Sandra agreed. That's our angle. At the very least, they were negligent in overseeing her actions. I suspect some board members were aware of her behavior and did nothing to stop it. As we delved deeper into the case, a troubling pattern emerged. Linda's harassment of me wasn't an isolated incident. We uncovered multiple complaints from other Maplewood Heights residents about her overbearing and often unlawful attempts to enforce homeowners association rules. One family had been fined thousands for unapproved holiday decorations. Another resident faced daily harassment for parking a work van in his driveway, despite no clear regulation against it. Perhaps most distressing, an elderly couple had been threatened with eviction for failing to maintain their lawn while the husband underwent chemotherapy. This goes beyond just you, Sandra informed me gravely. Linda and possibly others on the Homeowners Association board have been abusing their power for years. We need to put an end to it. I agreed wholeheartedly. What began as a personal dispute had escalated into a broader issue affecting an entire community. It wasn't merely about protecting my property anymore. It was about standing up for a community that had been bullied and manipulated by a group of power-hungry individuals. As the case progressed, we faced numerous legal hurdles. The Homeowners Association's lawyers attempted to have the case dismissed, arguing that I had no standing since I wasn't a member. But Sandra was prepared. Your Honor, she argued in court, Mr. Thompson may not be a member of the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association, but he has been directly and adversely affected by their actions. The defendants repeatedly tried to exert authority over his property through harassment, false reports to county officials, and ultimately, trespassing and attempted fraud. These actions have caused my client significant distress and financial harm. The judge agreed, allowing the case to proceed. As we prepared for trial, more Maplewood Heights residents came forward with their own stories of homeowners association abuse. Many were eager to testify, finally seeing an opportunity to challenge the tyranny they had endured for years. The trial became a media sensation. Local news outlets covered it extensively, and it even attracted national attention as a prime example of homeowners association overreach. Linda, out on bail, appeared in court each day with a sour expression, flanked by a team of expensive lawyers. Over 2 weeks, witness after witness took the stand to share their experiences with Linda and the Homeowners Association Board. Expert witnesses testified about property law and the limits of homeowners association authority. Finally, it was my turn to recount my story. As I sat in the witness box, I met Linda's gaze. Gone was the smug, authoritative woman who had invaded my property months ago. In her place was someone who seemed to grasp the severity of her actions. I detailed every interaction, every threat, every attempt to intimidate me into compliance. I spoke about the forged documents and the unauthorized landscaping crew, and I described the stress and anxiety her actions had inflicted on me. "Mr. Thompson," my lawyer asked, "why did you decide to pursue this case, even after the criminal charges were filed against Mrs. Brown?" I took a deep breath, recognizing that it wasn't just about me anymore. As I learned more about what was happening in Maplewood Heights, I realized that someone needed to take a stand. These people are my neighbors, even if we don't reside in the same development. They deserve better than to live in fear of arbitrary rules and constant harassment. During cross-examination, Linda's lawyer attempted to portray me as an uncooperative neighbor who refused to maintain community standards, but their arguments fell flat against the overwhelming evidence we presented. After days of deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. They ruled in my favor on all counts, awarding me substantial damages for trespassing, attempted fraud, and emotional distress. More importantly, they found the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association Board grossly negligent in their oversight of Linda's actions. The judge's ruling was scathing. In addition to the monetary damages, I am ordering a complete restructuring of the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association. An independent auditor will be appointed to oversee the process, ensuring that new bylaws are implemented to prevent future abuses of power. As we exited the courthouse, reporters and well-wishers swarmed around me. Many Maplewood Heights residents who had testified approached to thank me, tears in their eyes. "You've given us our neighborhood back," one elderly woman said, shaking my hand. "We can finally enjoy our homes without constant fear." I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion as I navigated through the crowd. The legal battle had been long and draining, but witnessing the positive impact on so many lives made it all worthwhile. Reaching my car, I saw Linda being led away by her lawyers. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something I hadn't expected: remorse. She gave me a small nod before being escorted into a waiting car. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun set over my property, I reflected on the past several months. What began as a simple boundary dispute had evolved into a fight for justice, not just for me, but for an entire community. I realized that sometimes, standing your ground isn't solely about protecting yourself. It's about setting an example and empowering others to stand up for what's right. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. News of the verdict spread rapidly, and I received numerous interview requests from local and national media outlets. While I was tempted to avoid the attention, Sandra convinced me that sharing my story could aid others in similar situations. "Your case could set a precedent," she explained. "It demonstrates that homeowners associations aren't all powerful and that homeowners have rights. That's a message worth sharing." I agreed to a few carefully selected interviews, always emphasizing that the true heroes were the Maplewood Heights residents who had the courage to come forward and testify. Meanwhile, changes in Maplewood Heights were swift and significant. The court-appointed auditor immediately began dismantling the old power structure. Linda and the entire Homeowners Association Board were removed from their positions, and a call went out for new volunteers to form an interim board. To everyone's surprise, Many of the residents who had testified during the trial stepped forward to serve. People who had once lived in fear of the homeowners association were now eager to help reform it. One sunny Saturday morning, about a month after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Tom, one of my neighbors from Maplewood Heights, who had been particularly outspoken during the trial about Linda's abuses. "Sam," he said, extending his hand, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. We're having our first community meeting with the new interim board today, and we were hoping you might consider attending." I must have looked surprised because Tom quickly added, "Not as a member, of course. We all know you're not part of Maplewood Heights. But as a neighbor and, well, as the person who made all this possible, we'd be honored if you'd say a few words." I was moved by the gesture. "I'd be happy to, Tom. Thank you for thinking of me." That afternoon, I walked into the Maplewood Heights Community Center, feeling somewhat like Daniel entering the lion's den. But instead of hostility, I was greeted with smiles and words of gratitude. The meeting was a stark contrast to the tense, rule-focused gatherings under Linda's leadership. There was open discussion, laughter, and a palpable sense of relief in the room. When Tom introduced me and invited me to speak, I received a standing ovation. I cleared my throat, feeling unexpectedly emotional. "Thank you all for this warm welcome. I know that technically I'm not part of your community, but over these past months, as I've gotten to know many of you and heard your stories, I've developed a genuine connection to Maplewood Heights." I paused, surveying the friendly faces before me. What happened here wasn't just about overzealous rule enforcement. It was about power and control. But today, I see a room full of people ready to reclaim that power and use it responsibly. "Moving forward," I continued, "I hope we can establish a new relationship between my property and Maplewood Heights. Not one based on strict rules and enforcement, but on mutual respect and good neighborliness. My door is always open if you need anything, and I hope you'll extend the same courtesy to me." As I finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Several residents approached to shake my hand or offer a hug. It was surreal, considering how adversarial things had been just a few months prior. After the meeting, as I was preparing to leave, I overheard a conversation that warmed my heart. "You know," one resident said to another, "I've lived here for 5 years, and this is the first time I've actually enjoyed a community meeting. I feel like I finally know my neighbors." The other resident nodded enthusiastically. "I know what you mean. It's like we can breathe again. No more walking on eggshells, afraid of getting a violation notice for every little thing." As I drove home that evening, I felt a sense of closure. The legal battle was over, justice had been served, and a community was healing. More importantly, I felt I had gained something unexpected, a sense of connection to neighbors I had once viewed as adversaries. Over the next few months, the transformation in Maplewood Heights was remarkable. The new Homeowners Association Board, led by Tom and other reform-minded residents, adopted a drastically different approach to community management. Gone were the nitpicky rules and a harsh enforcement. Instead, there was a focus on genuine community building. They organized block parties, started a community garden, and implemented programs to assist elderly or ill residents with yard work and home maintenance. Ironically, property values improved. As word spread about the reformed, resident-friendly Homeowners Association, Maplewood Heights became a highly sought-after neighborhood. Homes that went on the market were quickly sold, often above the asking price. As for me, my relationship with my neighbors evolved. No longer seen as the outsider who refused to comply, I was now regarded as something of a local hero. Residents would wave as they drove past my property, and I was frequently invited to community events. I even began hosting an annual Independence Day barbecue on my grounds, inviting all Maplewood Heights residents. It became a cherished tradition, with families spreading picnic blankets on my expansive lawn and children playing games in the meadow. About a year after the trial, I received another unexpected visitor. It was Linda. She stood awkwardly at my front gate, looking nothing like the confident, domineering woman I'd first met. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "I owe you an apology." I was momentarily stunned into silence, so she continued. What I did to you and everyone in Maplewood Heights was inexcusable. I let power go to my head and lost sight of what a community should truly be about. She took a deep breath. I know I can never undo the harm I caused, but I wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry. I studied her for a moment, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes. Thank you, Linda, I finally responded. That means a lot. She nodded, turning to leave, but I called out to her. Linda, the Independence Day barbecue is next week. You're welcome to come if you'd like. She looked surprised, then offered a small, grateful smile. I'd like that, Mr. Thompson. Thank you. As I watched her walk away, I marveled at how much had changed. What had begun as a conflict over property lines and homeowners association rules had led to a complete transformation of a community and even to this moment of reconciliation. I realized that sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about winning a fight. It's about creating opportunities for positive change, building bridges instead of walls. Looking out over my property, now seamlessly integrated into the thriving Maplewood Heights, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The estate that had been in my family for generations was no longer just a private retreat. It had become a symbol of community resilience, a testament that when people stand up for what's right, real change is achievable. As the sun set over the rolling hills of my land, casting a golden glow on the neighboring houses of Maplewood Heights, I smiled to myself. The property line between us might still exist on paper, but in all the ways that truly mattered, we had become one community, stronger and more united than ever before. Marcus Blake was a man who preferred to stay away from the limelight and did not seek validation from others. At 52, he had established his life and enterprise on pillars of discipline, creativity, and unwavering determination. His agricultural technology firm, Eco Harvest Technologies, stood as his greatest accomplishment, specializing in cutting-edge vertical agriculture and water-conserving irrigation systems. Eco Harvest was not merely a company. It was his enduring legacy, demonstrating his ability to merge innovative technology with sustainable practices to make a meaningful impact on the world. Situated on an expansive, secluded estate just beyond the city boundaries, his headquarters symbolized self-sufficiency and forward thinking. The estate itself was a feat of engineering. Rows of towering glass structures housed sophisticated hydroponic systems, where vibrant plant life flourished under meticulously adjusted LED lights. Solar panels adorned the rooftops, and a state-of-the-art water recycling facility guaranteed that every drop of water was maximized for reuse. It wasn't simply a farm. It was a bastion of innovation, designed to function autonomously from the city's frequently unreliable infrastructure. For Marcus, this place was his refuge, a sanctuary where the turmoil of the outside world could not reach him. However, this semblance of control was shattered on an ordinary Monday morning. Marcus arrived at the main gate in his dark green pickup truck, a steaming coffee in a reusable mug by his side. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. At first glance, everything appeared as usual. The sleek gate stood tall, the perimeter fencing was intact, and the distant hum of machinery indicated his team was already hard at work. But then, he noticed the vehicles. 3 large white trucks, emblazoned with an official-looking emblem, were parked just inside the property line. Bright orange barricades had been erected around the entrance, and a group of uniformed officials stood in clusters, some holding clipboards and others pacing with purpose. Marcus frowned, gripping the steering wheel tighter as unease settled in his chest. This wasn't a scheduled inspection he had been informed about. He pressed the button to lower his window and leaned out, attempting to get a better view. One of the figures, a sturdy man in his 40s with a military-style haircut, noticed him and gestured in a manner that felt more authoritative than friendly. Marcus cautiously moved the truck forward until it was directly in front of the gate, but before he could speak, the man approached with a clipboard in hand. "Good morning, sir," the man said briskly, without introducing himself. "We are here to perform a compliance inspection on behalf of the local Environmental Oversight Authority. I need you to park your vehicle outside the perimeter and step out." Marcus blinked in confusion. Compliance inspection? I wasn't notified of any inspection. The man remained unfazed. Notice was issued through the proper channels last week. If you didn't receive it, I suggest you contact the office. For now, this area is restricted while we conduct our work. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't appreciate being spoken to this way, especially on his own property. This is private land, he stated firmly. I haven't authorized any inspection, and I certainly didn't grant access to your team. The man's expression remained unchanged, though a hint of impatience flickered in his eyes. Mr. Blake, your property is subject to recent regulatory updates concerning agricultural sites. We are within our rights to conduct this inspection. If you don't comply, we will have to escalate this matter further. Marcus exited the truck, closing the door with a firm thud. He crossed his arms, his imposing stature casting a shadow over the smaller man. Show me the paperwork, he demanded. The man hesitated for a split second before handing over the clipboard. Marcus scanned the document, his eyes narrowing as he read the jargon-filled text. The language was intentionally vague, referencing newly amended regulations regarding environmental safety and resource management. Nowhere did it explicitly authorize a comprehensive inspection of his property. This doesn't grant you the authority to shut down my operations or restrict access, Marcus said, holding the clipboard back. You're overstepping. The man offered a faint smile, though it lacked warmth. With all due respect, sir, that's not your decision to make. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have work to do. He turned and walked away before Marcus could respond. Frustration welled up inside Marcus as he watched the group disperse across his property. One team was unloading equipment from the trucks, while another was already setting up what seemed to be measuring devices near his water recycling tanks. The sheer audacity of their actions left him momentarily stunned. He took out his phone and called his operations manager, Emily Carter, who was already on site. Emily, what's happening? He asked as soon as she answered. I was about to call you, she replied, her voice tense. These officials arrived about an hour ago. They claim we're under inspection for non-compliance with environmental standards. I've been trying to get answers, but they're not providing much information. Keep an eye on them. I'll handle this, Marcus said firmly. He ended the call and walked toward the nearest group, his boots crunching against the gravel. His mind raced as he weighed his options. These people weren't just inspectors. They were too organized, too confident. This wasn't a routine check. It was an ambush. As he approached the group, a tall woman with a stern expression stepped forward to intercept him. Mr. Blake, I'm Olivia Bennett, the lead supervisor for this inspection. I understand you have concerns, but I assure you everything we're doing is in accordance with the law. Law? Marcus shot back. You think legal jargon gives you the right to trespass on my property? I want this shut down immediately. Olivia smiled thinly, though there was a hard edge in her eyes. With all due respect, Mr. Blake, that's not how this works. You're welcome to consult your legal counsel, but until then, I suggest you let us do our job. Marcus clenched his fists, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on him. This wasn't just about compliance or regulations. Something far more calculated was at play, and he was determined to uncover it. Marcus spent the next several hours trying to gather his thoughts and make sense of the unfolding events. After the confrontation at the gate, he walked the perimeter of his property, carefully monitoring the so-called inspectors. They moved with precision, setting up equipment and taking notes as if they had rehearsed every step of their operation. His employees, confused and uneasy, kept their distance, unsure how to proceed with their usual tasks, while these outsiders swarmed the site. By the time Marcus reached his office, he had observed enough to realize this wasn't merely about environmental compliance. The scale of the operation, the trucks, the teams of people, the specialized equipment, was far too elaborate for a standard inspection. He needed answers, and he needed them immediately. Sitting at his desk, he dialed his lawyer, David Sullivan, a pragmatic attorney who had managed all of EcoHarvest's legal affairs since its inception. The phone rang only twice before David picked up. Marcus, David said, his voice sharp and attentive. I just received your message. What's the situation? I've got a problem, Marcus replied, leaning back in his chair and staring out the window at the intruders on his land. A team from the Environmental Oversight Agency has taken over my property. They're calling it a compliance inspection, but I wasn't notified, and their paperwork is questionable at best. Did they provide any official documentation? David asked. They handed me a clipboard filled with legal jargon, Marcus responded. Nothing with a clear signature or proper authorization. It feels like they're trying to intimidate me with bureaucratic nonsense. Send me a copy of whatever they gave you, David instructed. I'll investigate it right away. In the meantime, don't sign anything and don't let them confiscate any equipment or materials. If they attempt to remove anything from your property, contact me immediately. Marcus ended the call and scanned the documents with his phone, sending them over to David. He then sat back, contemplating his next move. He couldn't simply wait for his lawyer to untangle the legal web while these individuals remained on his property, disrupting operations and undermining his authority. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Emily entered the office, her expression serious. Marcus, you need to see this. She handed him a tablet, and Marcus's stomach dropped as he viewed the live feed from one of the security cameras near the main greenhouse. Two inspectors were dismantling a section of the irrigation system, carefully unscrewing parts and placing them into labeled containers. What are they doing? Marcus muttered, his voice low and angry. They claim they need to examine the equipment off-site, Emily explained. I tried to stop them, but they said I'd be interfering with an official investigation if I did. Marcus stood abruptly, grabbing his phone and storming out of the office. He marched straight to the greenhouse, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the inspectors. One of them, a slender man with wire-rimmed glasses, straightened up as Marcus approached. Mr. Blake, the man said in a measured tone as though addressing a stubborn child. This equipment needs to be tested in a controlled environment to ensure compliance with environmental regulations. You're not taking anything off this property, Marcus snapped. Put it back where you found it, or I'll personally escort you to the gate. The man remained unflinched. Sir, obstructing an environmental investigation is a serious offense. I strongly advise you to cooperate. Marcus stepped closer, towering over the man. This is my property, and that equipment is my intellectual property. You don't have the authority to handle anything without a proper court order. Before the man could respond, Olivia Bennett appeared, her calm demeanor as infuriating as ever. Mr. Blake, let's not escalate this unnecessarily, she said. We're simply doing our job, and we have every legal right to conduct this inspection. If you'd like, we can review the regulations together. Spare me the lecture, Marcus retorted. You're not taking anything, and if you don't leave my equipment alone, I'll have my security team escort you off the premises. Olivia's smile remained steady, but her eyes held a hard edge. Very well, she said. We'll note your lack of cooperation in our report, but I advise you to reconsider. Resistance rarely pays off in situations like this. Marcus clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain calm. He knew she was trying to provoke him into making a mistake that could be used against him. Without another word, he turned and walked away, signaling Emily to follow. Back in the office, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from David. He opened the email and quickly reviewed its contents. Marcus, I've examined the documents you sent. The language is deliberately vague, but they're referencing a new set of local ordinances passed last month. It appears these ordinances were specifically designed to target properties like yours, large-scale agricultural operations with advanced water systems. I'm investigating the individuals behind this, but it will take time. In the meantime, don't allow them to remove anything off-site and document all their actions. Marcus's frustration deepened as he read the message. This wasn't a random inspection. It was a coordinated attack. Someone had orchestrated this using legal loopholes and ambiguous regulations to gain control of his property. Olivia, he said, looking up from his phone, I want you to document every move they make. Get photos, videos, anything you can. Emily nodded. Understood. What's the plan? Marcus asked, taking a deep breath, his mind racing. First, we secure our critical systems. Move the backups for the irrigation software to the offsite server and lock down the control room. Second, I want every employee briefed on what's happening. No one speaks to these officials without my approval. Emily hesitated. Do you think they'll target the data? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but I'm not taking any chances. As the day progressed, the tension increased. The inspectors continued their work, setting up equipment and taking samples without providing any explanations. Marcus's employees grew more uneasy, their usual routines disrupted by the constant presence of strangers. By late afternoon, Marcus received another call from David. I have some preliminary findings, David said. The ordinances they're citing were pushed through by a coalition of local officials and a private environmental consulting firm called Terraplan Consultants. Terraplan Consultants, Emily echoed, frowning. I've heard that name before. You should have, David replied. They're a front for the Stonegate Ventures, one of the largest investment firms in the state. Stonegate has been aggressively acquiring agricultural land over the past 2 years, targeting properties with strategic value. Water access, renewable energy systems, you name it. Marcus felt a surge of anger but forced himself to stay focused. So this isn't about compliance, it's about forcing me out. Exactly, David confirmed. They're using the ordinances as a pretext to make your operations untenable. If they can't shut you down outright, they'll inundate you with fines and red tape until you have no choice but to sell. Marcus took a deep breath. What are my options? For now, we fight this legally, David advised. But you need to be prepared for a long battle. These people are playing the long game and have significant resources. Marcus hung up, his mind racing. He had worked too hard to let his company be taken from him. Whatever it took, he was going to fight back, and he wasn't going to play by their rules. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the property, Marcus Blake knew he was running out of time. The inspectors showed no signs of ending their operations. Instead, their activities became more invasive. Teams were now scattered across key areas of his facility, photographing equipment, recording data, and dismantling minor components under the guise of environmental assessment. Marcus paced his office, strategizing. David Sullivan's earlier revelation that a powerful investment group was likely behind this operation had confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just an inspection. It was a calculated attempt to dismantle his business piece by piece. Whoever was orchestrating this wanted him out of the way entirely. His thoughts were interrupted by Emily, his operations manager, who burst into the room, her face etched with frustration. Marcus, we've got a bigger problem, she said, slamming a tablet onto his desk. They've started accessing the main water recycling system. They claim they need to take samples directly from the filtration tanks. I tried to stop them, but they threatened immediate fines if I refused. Marcus glanced at the live feed on the tablet, which showed 2 inspectors in hazmat suits near the water tanks. One was preparing to drill into the filtration system while the other scribbled notes onto a clipboard. This is getting out of hand, he muttered, grabbing his jacket and heading toward the door. I'm putting an end to this now. Emily followed closely as they made their way across the property. The atmosphere was tense, with employees huddled in small groups, whispering to each other as they watched the outsiders at work. The usual hum of productivity had been replaced by a heavy silence that felt oppressive. When Marcus reached the filtration tanks, he found Olivia Bennett waiting for him. She stood with her arms crossed, her sharp suit immaculate despite the industrial grime surrounding them. Mr. Blake, she said smoothly, her tone oozing feigned politeness. I trust you're here to cooperate this time. What are you doing? Marcus demanded, pointing at the man drilling into the tank. You have no right to tamper with my systems. Shut it down now. Olivia raised an eyebrow, seemingly amused by his outburst. We're within our rights to collect water samples under the current compliance regulations, she stated. Your filtration system is a critical part of this inspection. If it's found to be non-compliant, we'll have to take further action. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. If you damage that system, you'll be personally responsible for replacing it, and I'll ensure the courts hear about every single violation you've committed today. For a moment, Olivia's mask slipped. Her smile faltered, and a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Quickly, she recovered, gesturing to the technician to halt the drilling. "Very well," she said, her voice icy. "We'll document your refusal to cooperate and include it in our report. But I assure you, Mr. Blake, this won't end well for you." Marcus ignored her, turning to Emily. "Get security to lock down this area. No one touches these tanks without my explicit permission." As they walked back toward the main building, Emily spoke in a low voice. "Marcus, this isn't just about compliance anymore. They're testing you, seeing how far they can push." "I know," Marcus replied, "and I'm not going to let them win." Later that evening, as the inspectors packed up their equipment for the day, Marcus gathered his core team in the conference room. The mood was grim, but determination filled the air. "We're under attack," Marcus began, his voice firm. "This isn't just an inspection. It's a coordinated effort to cripple our operations and force us out. I've spoken with David, and we have a legal case, but that won't be enough. These people have money, connections, and time on their side. We need to be smarter, faster, and tougher than they are." "What's the plan?" one of his senior engineers asked. "First, we secure our systems," Marcus replied. "I want all critical data backed up and moved to the off-site server. Lock down access to the control room and disable any external connections they could exploit. Second, we document everything. I want photos, videos, timestamps, anything that shows what they've done here. Emily, that's your job." Emily nodded. "Already on it. I have security footage and logs from today. I'll ensure everything is backed up." "Good," Marcus said. "Now we need to identify who we're dealing with. David mentioned an investment group with a vested interest in taking us down. I want every connection they have to local officials, every name tied to those ordinances, and every company they've targeted before. If we can expose them, we'll have a fighting chance." As the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just defending his business, he was fighting for everything he had built and believed in. However, the next morning brought an even greater escalation. When Marcus arrived at the property, he discovered that the barricades from the previous day had been replaced with heavy-duty fencing. Signs warning of restricted access were posted every few feet, and a new team of inspectors was already at work. One of them approached Marcus as he exited his truck, handing him an envelope with a red seal. "This is a cease and desist order," the man said curtly. "Effective immediately. All operations on this property are suspended pending further investigation." Marcus tore open the envelope, scanning the document inside. The order cited vague claims of environmental violations and safety concerns, clearly another tactic to force him into submission. "This is nonsense," he said, crumpling the paper in his hand. "I suggest you take it seriously. Failure to comply will result in fines and potential legal action," the man replied. Marcus clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to lash out. He knew this was exactly what they wanted, to make him lose control and commit a mistake they could exploit. Instead, he took a deep breath and turned to Emily, who had just arrived. "Get David on the phone," he ordered. "I want an emergency injunction filed today and contact security. No one enters or exits without my approval." As the day progressed, the tension escalated. Employees began receiving calls from anonymous numbers offering incentives to leave eco-harvest and seek other opportunities. Some of the younger staff, already shaken by the inspector's presence, started to waver. By late afternoon, Marcus received another alarming update. One of his engineers, Noah Parker, had discovered that several key pieces of equipment had been tagged with tracking devices, hidden beneath panels and out of sight. "They're watching us," Emily reported, her voice filled with quiet anger. Marcus nodded, his expression hardening. "Then it's time we watched them back." That night, Marcus stayed late, reviewing every piece of information his team had gathered. The evidence was mounting, but so was the pressure. He knew the coming days would push him to his limits. But if they thought they could intimidate him, they were sorely mistaken. This was his land, his company, and his fight, and Marcus Blake was a man who never backed down. 3 days had passed since the so-called inspectors invaded his property, disrupting operations, tagging equipment, and unsettling his employees. The once thriving hub of innovation at EcoHarvest Technologies now felt more like a besieged fortress. Every corner of the estate was monitored, every move scrutinized, and every action questioned by the outsiders who acted as though they owned the place. The injunction filed by his lawyer, David Sullivan, had bought some time, temporarily halting the inspectors' most aggressive actions, but it hadn't stopped them entirely. They continued to linger on the outskirts of the facility, conducting what they called observational assessments and documenting every inch of the land. Meanwhile, the cease and desist order still loomed, preventing Marcus from resuming normal operations. It was a calculated move, applying just enough pressure to drain the business without crossing into outright illegality. As he reviewed the latest report from Emily, his operations manager, Marcus's mind buzzed with questions. Who were these people? What did they truly want? And why had they gone to such lengths to target him specifically? The answers remained frustratingly elusive, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about compliance or environmental concerns. This was personal. Emily entered the room without knocking, her tablet in hand and a determined look on her face. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, placing the tablet on his desk. The screen displayed a series of photos taken by the security team the previous night. At first glance, they appeared to be innocuous, grainy images of inspectors moving equipment or setting up devices. But Emily zoomed in on one particular shot and Marcus's eyes narrowed. The photo showed two inspectors standing near the main water recycling tanks. One held what seemed to be a standard environmental sensor, while the other was crouched low, adjusting something metallic that blended into the gravel. "What is that?" Marcus asked, leaning closer. "We're not entirely sure," Emily replied, "but one of the guards found a similar device buried near the western perimeter this morning. It's some kind of high-frequency transmitter, likely used for real-time data collection." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So they're not just inspecting us, they're spying on us." "It gets worse," Emily said, swiping to another image. This one shows a drone hovering over the property, its dark silhouette barely visible against the night sky. "We've confirmed at least 2 drones conducting aerial surveys. They're mapping the entire estate." A cold knot formed in Marcus's stomach. This wasn't an inspection. It was reconnaissance. Someone was gathering detailed information about EcoHarvest's layout, infrastructure, and operations. But for what purpose? Before he could ponder further, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from David. Marcus put the phone on speaker and gestured for Emily to stay. "David," he said, "tell me you've got good news." "Depends on how you define good," David replied, his tone clipped. "I've been digging into the ordinances they're using to justify this operation. They were pushed through by a coalition of local officials and a private consulting firm called Terraplan Consultants." "Terraplan Consultants," Emily echoed, frowning. "I've heard that name before." "You should have," David said. "They're a front for the Stonegate Ventures, one of the largest investment firms in the state. Stonegate has been aggressively acquiring agricultural land over the past 2 years, targeting properties with strategic value. Water access, renewable energy systems, you name it." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "The pieces are finally falling into place. So this is about the land," he said. "They're trying to force me out so they can take over." "Exactly," David confirmed. "Stonegate uses Terraplan Consultants to create regulatory pressure on their targets, making it impossible for owners to operate. Once the business is crippled, they swoop in with lowball offers to buy the property. It's efficient, ruthless, and technically legal, at least on paper." "Not this time," Marcus declared, his voice steely. "I'm not selling. I don't care what it takes." "That's the spirit," David replied. "But you need to be smart about this. I've filed a request to review their permits, but it'll take time to go through the courts. In the meantime, document everything. If we can prove they're overstepping their bounds, we'll have a case for damages," David added. After ending the call, Marcus sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. Stonegate wasn't just a competitor. They were predators, systematically dismantling businesses like his to expand their own empire. And now they had set their sights on EcoHarvest. Determined not to let them win, Marcus convened a meeting with his senior team that afternoon. The mood was tense, but his determination was contagious. "Here's the plan," he began. "First, we're going to secure every critical system on this property. Emily, I want the E-team to conduct a full sweep for any additional transmitters or devices, lock down our servers, and encrypt all sensitive data. Second, we need a complete inventory of our equipment. If anything has been tampered with, I want to know immediately." Emily nodded, already taking notes. "What about the drones?" she asked. "I'll handle that," Marcus responded. "We have a few counter-surveillance tools in storage. It's time to put them to use." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as Marcus's team mobilized to implement his plan. Meanwhile, Marcus focused on the drones. He retrieved a portable signal jammer from the storage shed, a piece of equipment he had acquired years ago but never thought he'd actually need. That evening, as the sun set below the horizon, Marcus stood on the roof of the main building, the signal jammer in hand. Sure enough, the drones returned, their faint hum barely audible over the rustling of the trees. Marcus activated the jammer, watching with grim satisfaction as one of the drones abruptly veered off course and crashed into the nearby woods. It was a small victory, but it gave him a sense of control in an increasingly chaotic situation. The following day brought an unexpected twist. One of Marcus's engineers, a meticulous man named Noah Parker, discovered something alarming during a routine inspection of the western greenhouse. Hidden beneath a panel near the foundation was a small, unmarked container. Inside were several documents, blueprints, maps, and what appeared to be a detailed proposal for a new development project. Marcus spread the documents across his desk, his eyes scanning the pages with growing disbelief. The proposal outlined plans for a high-end residential community complete with luxury amenities and private access to a water reservoir that would be built on EcoHarvest's land. The Stonegate Ventures logo was prominently displayed in the corner of each page. "They're already planning the takeover," Emily said, her voice filled with anger. "They're not just planning it," Marcus replied. "They're counting on it. These individuals think they've already won." As he stared at the documents, a spark of determination ignited within him. This was more than a fight for his company. It was a fight for everything he stood for. If Stonegate wanted a war, they were about to get one. The next morning brought an unsettling calm to the property, as if the storm of the past few days had suddenly paused. But Marcus knew better. Stonegate and their proxies weren't done by a long shot. Their methods were calculated and methodical, and Marcus understood this was merely the eye of the storm. Still, the eerie quiet gave him and his team a chance to regroup and prepare for what was coming next. In his office, Marcus pored over the blueprints and development plans discovered in the unmarked container the previous day. The details were chillingly specific. The proposal outlined a timeline for transforming EcoHarvest's property into a sprawling luxury residential enclave, complete with artificial lakes, private gardens, and a community center that would replace his greenhouses. It was a vision of complete erasure. Everything Marcus had built would be wiped away as if it had never existed. "They've already decided we're finished," Marcus muttered to himself. Emily entered the office without knocking, a grim look on her face. "We've got another problem," she said, placing a tablet on the desk. "One of our employees just quit. Jason from the engineering team. He said he couldn't handle the pressure." Marcus's brow furrowed. "Jason has been with EcoHarvest for years and is one of our most reliable engineers. Did he mention why?" Emily hesitated, then sighed. "He mentioned getting an offer from an unnamed consulting firm. It was too good to pass up. Higher salary, relocation expenses, the works." "Sounds like Stonegate got to him," Marcus declared, clenching his fists as a surge of anger rushed through him. "It's not enough for them to attack the company. They're actively picking off our people, sowing doubt and disloyalty among the team. We can't afford to lose anyone else," he said firmly. "Call a meeting with the staff. I need to address this head-on." An hour later, the employees gathered in the main conference room, their expressions a mix of apprehension and exhaustion. Marcus stood at the front, his hands gripping the edges of the table as he looked around the room. "I know this hasn't been easy," he began. "The past few days have been some of the most challenging we've ever faced as a company. But let me make one thing clear. EcoHarvest is not going anywhere. These individuals think they can intimidate us, divide us, and force us out. They believe we'll roll over and let them take everything we've worked for, but they're wrong. He paused, letting his words sink in. I can't promise this will be over soon, and I can't promise it'll be easy. But I can promise you this. We are going to fight back, and if you're willing to stand with me, we'll come out of this stronger than ever. The room was silent for a moment. Then Emily stepped forward. I'm with you, Marcus, she said, her voice steady. We all are. The employees nodded in agreement, and Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't giving up. Not yet. However, any sense of relief was short-lived. That evening, a new threat emerged. Marcus was in the control room with Emily, reviewing security footage when an alert flashed across the monitor. One of the motion detectors near the northern perimeter had been triggered. Marcus clicked on the feed, and his stomach tightened at what he saw. Two figures in dark clothing were moving along the fence line, carrying what looked like bolt cutters. They were careful, staying in the shadows and avoiding the security cameras as much as possible. But their intent was clear. They were trying to break in. Marcus grabbed his phone and called the head of security, James Turner. We've got intruders on the north side, he said. Take a team and intercept them. I want them caught, not scared off. Within minutes, James and two guards were on the move. Marcus and Emily watched the live feed as the security team approached the intruders, using the cover of darkness to their advantage. The figures were focused on cutting through the fence and didn't notice the guards until it was too late. James and his team moved in swiftly, subduing the intruders without a struggle. When the guards brought them back to the main building, Marcus got his first look at them. Two young men, both in their 20s, dressed in black tactical gear. They refused to answer any questions, remaining silent as the guards searched them. Emily pulled a phone from one of their pockets and handed it to Marcus. Let's see who sent them, she said. Marcus unlocked the phone and scrolled through the recent messages. Most were cryptic, but one stood out, a set of instructions detailing how to disable the property's water recycling system. The message was signed with a single letter. A. Terraplan Consultants, Marcus said, his voice low. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. The intruders were handed over to the local police, but Marcus knew they wouldn't talk. Whoever sent them would ensure they stayed silent. Still, the incident was a clear escalation. Stonegate wasn't just applying pressure anymore. They were moving towards sabotage. The next morning, Marcus called David to update him on the situation. They're getting desperate, he said. They sent people onto my property last night to try to disable the water system. David sighed. That's a bold move, even for them. Did you get any evidence? We caught the intruders and found instructions on their phone, Marcus replied. But I doubt the police will pursue it. They're too entangled with local politics, and Stonegate's influence is too extensive. Then we'll have to handle this ourselves, David said. I have a contact at a federal agency who might be willing to look into this. If we can prove Stonegate is engaging in illegal activity, we can shut them down for good. As the call ended, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but he finally had a path forward. That afternoon, as Marcus reviewed the latest reports, Emily entered the office with an envelope in her hand. This just arrived, she said, her expression uneasy. Marcus opened the envelope and found a single piece of paper inside. It was a message, typed in bold letters. Sell your land while you still can. The threat was clear, but instead of fear, Marcus felt a surge of defiance. I'm not going to let them win, he said quietly. Let them come, he added. They're going to regret ever starting this. The air was thick with tension as Marcus stood in the dimly lit control room, staring at the map displayed on the monitor. It showed his property and the surrounding area with every sensor, camera, and checkpoint marked in sharp detail. For days, the assault on his business had escalated. Threats, sabotage, and now a direct attempt to cripple his water recycling system. Marcus knew he was running out of time. Stonegate and their proxies weren't going to stop until they had everything. Emily entered the room, her tablet in hand. "We just got confirmation," she said, her voice tight. "The injunction hearing has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. David says it's our best shot at freezing their operations." Marcus nodded, his jaw set. "And the equipment inventory?" "Completed," Emily replied. "We found 3 more tracking devices embedded in the soil sensors near the east greenhouse. Whoever's behind this knows exactly what they're doing." Marcus leaned on the table, his fingers gripping its edge. "It's not enough to defend ourselves anymore. We need to strike back." That night, Marcus and his security team prepared for what felt like a final stand. They reinforced the perimeter, adjusted the cameras to eliminate blind spots, and conducted a thorough sweep for any remaining devices. But as the preparations continued, an idea began to form in Marcus's mind. "They're mapping us," he said, pacing the control room, "tracking every system, every weak point. But what if we use that against them?" Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "We feed them false data," Marcus explained. "If they're relying on these transmitters to monitor our operations, we can manipulate what they see, make them think they found a critical failure or, even better, a violation severe enough to backfire on them." Emily's eyes lit up with understanding. "You mean set a trap?" "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "If we can create the appearance of a catastrophic compliance issue, they'll act on it. And when they do, we'll catch them in the act." Over the next several hours, Marcus's team worked tirelessly to implement the plan. Using the transmitter Stonegate had planted, they crafted a data stream that simulated a breach in the property's containment systems. It was a delicate balance, convincing enough to draw attention, but not so obvious that it appeared staged. By midnight, everything was in place. Marcus sat in the control room, watching the monitors as his team monitored the perimeter. The tension was palpable. This plan had to work. Shortly after 2 a.m., the first alert came. A vehicle had stopped near the southern perimeter just outside the range of the security cameras. Moments later, 3 figures emerged from the shadows, their movements swift and practiced. "They're here," Emily said, her voice low but steady. Marcus watched as the intruders made their way toward the east greenhouse, the same area the false data had highlighted as compromised. They carried tools and small devices clearly prepared for sabotage. "Let them get to the target," Marcus instructed. "We need to catch them red-handed." The intruders reached the greenhouse and began working quickly, dismantling parts of the structure and planting what appeared to be small charges. Marcus's stomach churned at the sight. These weren't just saboteurs. They were setting the stage for a disaster that would justify a full shutdown of EcoHarvest's operations. Once they were fully engaged, Marcus gave the signal. Within seconds, the security team moved in, surrounding the intruders with practiced precision. Flashlights illuminated the scene, and the men froze, their hands raised as armed guards closed in. "Don't move," James, the head of security, ordered. The intruders were disarmed and restrained, but it wasn't until their equipment was searched that the full scope of the operation became clear. Among their tools were devices designed to simulate chemical leaks and soil contamination, enough to fabricate evidence of environmental violations severe enough to destroy Marcus's company. "Call the police," Marcus ordered, his voice cold, "and make sure David gets copies of everything we found." By the time the authorities arrived, the evidence was overwhelming. The intruders refused to speak, but their equipment told the story clearly enough. Marcus handed over the data from the tracking devices, the footage from the night's events, and the fake development plans they had left behind during their earlier intrusion. The next morning, Marcus and David arrived at the courthouse, armed with enough evidence to turn the tables on Stonegate. The hearing was tense, with Stonegate's representatives arguing that the compliance measures were necessary for public safety. But when David presented the footage and documentation, their defense began to crumble. "They fabricated violations, planted devices, and sent agents onto my client's property to sabotage his operations," David stated, his voice cutting through the courtroom. "This isn't about compliance or environmental safety. This is about greed." The judge reviewed the evidence with a furrowed brow before turning to Stonegate's attorney. "Do you have an explanation for this?" The attorney stammered, clearly caught off guard. We, we were following standard procedures. Standard procedures don't include sabotage and planting false evidence, the judge interrupted. This case warrants further investigation. By the end of the hearing, Marcus had secured not only an injunction against Stonegate's activities, but also an order for an independent investigation into their practices. It was a decisive blow that shifted the momentum firmly in his favor. As he left the courthouse, Marcus felt the weight of the past week begin to lift. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he had the upper hand. Stonegate had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. "This isn't just about winning," he said to David as they walked to the car. "It's about ensuring they can't do this to anyone else." David nodded. "And that's exactly what we'll do." The days following the hearing were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus Blake had won a critical battle, but the war was far from over. The injunction against Stonegate meant the immediate pressure on EcoHarvest had eased, and the independent investigation into their practices had sent shockwaves through their carefully constructed facade. Still, Marcus knew Stonegate wouldn't retreat quietly. Corporations like Stonegate didn't admit defeat. They adapted, regrouped, and struck back harder. Back at EcoHarvest, the atmosphere was cautious but hopeful. Employees who had been on edge for weeks now walked the grounds with a renewed sense of purpose. The constant presence of saboteurs and inspectors had lifted, and operations were beginning to return to normal. Yet the scars of the conflict were still visible. Dismantled equipment, reinforced fences, and tightened security measures were stark reminders of the battle they had fought. Marcus gathered his senior team in the conference room for a final debrief. "We've taken the first step," he began, his tone resolute. "The injunction gives us room to breathe, and the investigation into Stonegate will expose their methods. But make no mistake, this isn't over. We need to stay vigilant." Emily, seated to his right, nodded. "We've implemented a comprehensive security protocol. Every system is being monitored in real time, and all employees are undergoing additional training on how to handle potential threats." "Good," Marcus said. "But we can't just play defense. If we want to protect EcoHarvest long-term, we need to take the fight to them." The team discussed plans to expand EcoHarvest's influence and partnerships. By aligning with other independent agricultural companies and environmental organizations, they could create a network strong enough to resist corporate predators like Stonegate. It wasn't just about protecting EcoHarvest anymore. It was about setting an example and helping others stand up to similar threats. 2 weeks later, the investigation into Stonegate yielded its first major breakthrough. Federal agents raided Terraplan Consultants' offices, uncovering a trove of documents that detailed their coordinated efforts to destabilize targeted businesses. The plans for EcoHarvest's takeover were just the tip of the iceberg. Dozens of other companies had been similarly attacked, their land and resources siphoned off under the guise of regulatory enforcement. The news spread quickly, tarnishing Stonegate's reputation and triggering lawsuits from affected business owners. For Marcus, it was a moment of vindication. Watching the public backlash unfold, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Stonegate had finally been exposed for what they were: predators who hid behind bureaucracy and influence. But the victory wasn't just about taking down Stonegate. It was about what came next. 1 month after the hearing, EcoHarvest hosted an open house event, inviting local officials, business leaders, and community members to tour the facility. Marcus stood near the entrance, greeting visitors and explaining EcoHarvest's mission. The event was a success, showcasing not only the company's innovations, but also its resilience. As the day wound down, Emily approached Marcus with a small plaque in her hands. She handed it to him with a smile. "I thought this would be a good addition to the property," she said. Marcus turned the plaque over, reading the engraved words. "Here stands a company that refused to yield." He smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "It's perfect," he said, motioning for her to help him mount it near the main greenhouse. As he stood there, watching the late afternoon sun cast its golden glow over the estate, Marcus reflected on how far they'd come. EcoHarvest wasn't just a business. It was a testament to the power of standing firm against impossible odds. The battle with Stonegate had cost him dearly, time, resources, and peace of mind, but it had also strengthened his resolve and revealed the depths of his team's loyalty and determination. For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to relax. The battle was over, but the lessons it had taught him would endure. Eco-Harvest was stronger than ever, and so was he. As the last of the guests departed, Marcus walked the estate alone, taking in the sights and sounds of his land. The hum of the irrigation systems, the glow of the greenhouses, the distant chatter of his employees. It was a symphony of resilience and hope. Though he knew challenges would arise again, he was ready for them. After all, this was his land, his legacy, and his fight, and Marcus Blake was a man who never backed down. 3 years ago, I purchased a farm with the hope of finally finding a serene retreat. No neighbors to disturb the peace, no incessant noise, and absolutely no drama. It was just me, the expansive countryside, and a quaint, weathered cottage I had longed to renovate. The land met all my desires: several acres of gently undulating pastures, a boundary of trees at the rear, and an old gate secured with a padlock at the entrance. Everything was straightforward, secluded, and entirely mine. However, Karen, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, from the adjacent neighborhood, made an appearance. Initially, I assumed she was simply being friendly. She introduced herself on the day I was unloading my final moving boxes, offering a smile that seemed excessively bright and slightly insincere. Karen informed me that she was the HOA president from the nearby subdivision. She gestured vaguely towards the uniform houses about half a mile away and mentioned their interest in maintaining the neighborhood's appearance. I didn't give it much thought. I returned her smile, nodded, and explained that my property was outside their HOA boundaries, so I wasn't part of it. She chuckled somewhat awkwardly and responded, "Oh, of course not, but it's always good to be a good neighbor." That phrase would recur later, sending chills down my spine. But at the time, I dismissed it as casual conversation and continued unpacking. A few weeks later, Karen returned while I was outside fixing the old gate. The gate, made of heavy metal, swung across my driveway and had become rusted over time. It wasn't particularly attractive, but it served its purpose by keeping the property secure and providing the privacy I cherished. I had just finished painting it when I heard the sound of gravel crunching behind me. Karen stood there smiling once more, holding a plate of cookies. "I thought I'd bring you these," she said, handing me the plate. "Just a little welcome gift." I thanked her, and we exchanged a few words. Then she casually pointed towards the gate. "Some of the folks in our neighborhood were curious why it's locked. It's such a shame to keep such a lovely piece of land all closed off like that." I raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's locked. I value my privacy," I replied firmly. Her smile wavered momentarily before she quickly regained composure. "Oh, of course, I just meant it's such a beautiful area. It would be great for people to enjoy a walk or take in the view. You know, as good neighbors." There it was again. Good neighbors. I offered a polite laugh and mentioned my preference for solitude. She nodded, clearly displeased with my response. Before departing, she added, "If you ever want to make improvements to the property, My relatives have maintained ownership of a 50-acre homestead just beyond the metropolitan boundaries for over a century. It has always been a tranquil sanctuary where we have reared livestock and cultivated various crops. That tranquility was disrupted when a new subdivision of grandiose homes was constructed adjacent to our land a few years ago. These upscale residences were governed by their own homeowners association, led by a board comprising some of the most self-important and meddlesome individuals imaginable. Initially, I attempted to steer clear of any disputes, but they seemed bent on complicating my existence from the outset. The issues began with trivial grievances about my livestock causing disturbances or leaving waste near the boundary fence. It was irrelevant that my farm had existed 100 years before their neighborhood. I courteously informed them that cows would behave as cows and requested that they cease harassing my animals. Matters worsened when they started issuing violation notices concerning the unattractive state of my barn and storage sheds. Their regulations stipulated that structures on my land needed to be freshly painted and meticulously maintained. I explained that while their standards might apply within their own development, I was not required to decorate my barns to match their preferences. Subsequently, they began to bother me about a modest footbridge I had constructed over the creek separating our properties. The bridge provided convenient access to the rear pasture where my cattle grazed. Since it was built from roughly hewn timber, rather than the brick or wrought iron used in their ornamental bridges, they deemed it an eyesore. I firmly told them that they had absolutely no authority over what I did on my private property. If they were displeased with the appearance of my farm, they should not have established their subdivision beside it. This was the turning point when the new Homeowners Association president, a woman I'll refer to as Karen, decided to escalate the situation. One day, I stepped outside to find a crew dismantling the footbridge with chainsaws on my property. I hurried over, yelling for them to stop as they were destroying my private land. The foreman merely shrugged and stated they had been contracted by the Homeowners Association to remove an unauthorized structure. When I insisted on seeing the permits, he directed me to speak with Karen. She stood nearby with a smug expression, arms crossed while overseeing the demolition. I confronted her directly, accusing her of trespassing and vandalizing my property. She dismissed my claims, asserting that the bridge was a safety hazard that needed to be removed. I highlighted that the bridge was over 100 feet from the nearest Homeowners Association residence, and thus outside their jurisdiction. However, Karen arrogantly maintained that anything potentially visible from association property was under their control. Realizing she was unwilling to reason, I took out my phone to call the sheriff. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream. Now back to the story. As soon as I began dialing, Karen signaled her team